Well, good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. Every Monday through Friday, we have the opportunity to interview interesting people. And tonight, we've got a really interesting gentleman for you, the leader of the official opposition, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Mr. Andrew Scheer. Mr. Scheer, how are you today?
We're doing good. Like most Canadians, we're pretty anxious about what's going on and the health and safety of our neighbors and our family. In addition, we've got 5 kids kind of cooped up in the house, and that brings its own set of challenges as we try to adapt to the current reality, doing a lot of meetings by Skype, a lot of conference calls, things like that. But we're all hopeful that we can return to normal as quickly as possible.
Excellent. Well, I understand that we're reaching you in Saskatchewan, so I'm not sure whether we're in your house or your local office, but we appreciate yourself making yourself available to us. So, obviously, tell me, what do you think of the government's response, what we're doing, both from a healthcare standpoint, but then obviously the second question is from a fiscal standpoint. And so if you could, let me know what you think, I'd really appreciate it, sir.
Sure. And first and foremost, I just want to say that we recognize that these are unprecedented times, and every government around the world of all different political stripes are facing challenges that governments normally don't have to face. So we're conducting our role as the opposition with that in mind, pointing out things that we believe need to be done better or quicker, trying to do so in a constructive way to get better results for Canadians. We had some concerns early on. When we think back to just about a month ago, we were calling for tighter border controls, increased travel restrictions. At that time, the government of Canada had decided not to cut off flights coming in from countries that had experienced spikes in cases. We thought that was a bad idea at the time, and it turns out we were right. That's something we should have done earlier on. We've had a lot of questions about the government's ability to procure the personal protective equipment. They sent thousands and hundreds of thousands of pieces of equipment to China early on in the pandemic. Now there's a lot of concerns about the security of our own equipment here. We've pointed out some concerns with the wage subsidy that they've introduced. They initially brought it in at 10%. We think it should be higher. We're glad to see they listened to us on that. So we're finding that right balance, the proper balance between pointing out flaws and offering concrete solutions to go forward. And hopefully when the government says they want to take a Team Canada approach, hopefully they're serious about that, and they will take our suggestions and idea when we do have proposals that will fix some of the shortcomings.
I know we're in a minority government. Are they consulting you on an appropriately more frequent basis?
Well, we have had some calls, some contact that, I've had a couple of calls with Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. I know that our own team of shadow ministers, from our health shadow minister, Matt Genereux, to our finance shadow minister, Pierre Poilievre, have been in contact. We have been, putting forward some of those solutions. We haven't yet seen the government agree to having kind of an accountability session or a more formal engagement. We've been pushing very hard to get the committees, the House of Commons committee, up and running in a way that can really allow for that. Sleeves rolled up, pencils out. How can we draft this legislation and it does what we want to do? That's what we're going to be pushing for in the days ahead. Say, okay, you've provided some help to Canadians out the door. Now we really do need that parliamentary scrutiny. We will get better results for Canadians if government decisions are analyzed more rigorously, and if MPs are allowed to pose those tough questions and hold people to account for their actions. We'll get better results for Canadians. That's why we're pushing for that.
There seems to be a reluctance to initiate the Emergency Measures Act, or what was the War Measures Act. Why do you think that is, and is that the right decision?
Well, I believe it's because as Canadians, we hold our civil liberties so dear. We know that many countries around the world don't have the same freedoms that we have here, and you have to be very vigilant. You have to be very darn sure, very careful that if you are going to forego a civil liberty, that you're doing so because there's a proper justification and there's a plan in place to return those civil liberties. So right now, we believe that there are enough tools at the provincial government's disposal. They have enough authority. The federal government has enough authority that right now we don't see the need for it. We believe that especially when you've got the cooperation of other political parties, that the government's able to respond quickly to things as they unfold. So for now, we're satisfied to use the existing authorities that are there.
I interviewed Diane Francis, a columnist with the National Post, who's typically thought of as a reasonably right-wing columnist, and also the CEO of a Ottawa startup, Spartan Bioscience, that's an infectious disease expert, has a testing unit in front of Health Canada right now for COVID-19. Both of them said that the only chance that we've got to get out of this pandemic early is to be far more strenuous in our controls. And they used South Korea as the example, where people had to have apps that tracked them if they had the infection, and there was complete attitude of social distancing for sure, stay at home for sure. Even some rumors of people forcibly quarantined in hotels if they showed infection. Do you think we need to be far more strenuous in our attack for this infection?
Well, I think we need to certainly have that conversation to look at models that other countries have used that seem to be working. It's worth looking at South Korea. It's worth looking at Taiwan and Singapore and saying, what did they do? Because not only have they been able to flatten the curve in their own countries, which means that fewer people are getting sick and there's less of a strain on the healthcare system. So that's good from a public health perspective, keeping people healthier and making sure that the healthcare system is able to respond as it's needed. That's key. But it also allows for the second part of the conversation that we're having, and that is economically. When you're aggressive in the testing up front, when you've got better controls and measures in place to ensure self-isolation for those who have been exposed, then you are able to have more of the economy operating as normal. And some of the reports that we're hearing from those countries are that they do have a little bit more of a return to normal life in terms of people going to stores and going to work. And if we can replicate that here, not only will we save lives by protecting our healthcare system and delaying as long as possible the timeline it takes for people to get the virus and be treated for it, but we'll also have a less of a hole to dig out from economically. So that's one of the reasons why we're pushing so hard for some kind of a return to Parliament so that we can start to have these conversations. I'd love to hear from our own health experts here why something that they're doing in South Korea could or could not be implemented here. I'd love to have that conversation. Right now, those conversations are happening behind closed doors, not in front of the media, not in front of the House of Commons, not in front of the Canadian public. I think it's time that we really shine a light on all of these types of discussions.
Now, I think all of us are watching a little bit too much news these days, and we're able to compare what's happening in the United States versus what's happening in Canada. And, you effectively have a minority government in the United States with Congress under the control of the Democrats. Why is that so much more partisan? Why is there so much more opposition? Are they just nastier people in the United States, or we less partisan? Or have we got things better under control and the Americans less under control? Or, why is there such a difference between the way the Democrats are attacking President Trump versus, you're making your point, but you're not attacking the government?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I follow American politics a little bit less than I used to before I got into federal politics here in Canada. I think, if we're going to make a comparison, I like to put it in a positive context. We are a very polite people. We do, as a society, we want to have vigorous debates, but we want to make sure it's about issues and not about people, and that we don't spend too much time attacking each other individually. In the U.S., there seems to have been more of a permission, so to speak, for politicians to engage at a little bit more on a personal level. I look to their system, and there's pros and cons with every system. We've got a parliamentary system based on the Westminster system. It allows for the government, as long as it can maintain the confidence of the House, to act very quickly. The Canadian government is empowered with a lot of power that the U.S. president doesn't have. There's a check and balance there that we don't have in Canada. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. Right now, in the context of responding to a crisis, it does give our provincial and federal governments the capacity to move quickly and to implement policies, whereas in the U.S. it takes more of a buy-in from Congress, and even more perhaps at the state level as well. So I like our system. I like our parliamentary democracy. I like the way our institutions have evolved, but it only works here if the opposition is allowed to do its job. It only works if there is this accountability. Right now, the House of Commons hasn't really had a question period where we've been able to kind of really dig deep into this since early March. We think it's time to reinstitute some of that here, bring some of that back so that we can hold our decision makers to account as they navigate this country through one of the biggest challenges, certainly in my lifetime.
Well, some economists are saying that this could be worse than the Great Recession. Some are saying it's the biggest calamity since World War II, and that it could be from an economic standpoint as bad as the Great Depression. And a lot of that depends on whether we come out of it in a V-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, or an L-shaped recovery. And some are saying that the L-shaped could be the result, and it could be incredibly damaging for GDP, for tax revenue, for employment, etc. If you were Prime Minister of Canada, what would you be doing from a fiscal standpoint?
Well, if I could just play a little bit of when we would not have run tens of billions of dollars worth of deficits while times were good. One of the reasons why we were calling for a path to get back to balanced budgets was precisely so that when the unknown came, we by no means suggesting we knew it was going to be a health pandemic, but there were early signs of a global recession, a downturn here at home. So we were saying, look, when times are good, don't be racking up billions and billions of dollars worth of deficits. Let's pay down some of the debt to give ourselves better flexibility. In the here and now, we believe that the most critical thing the government should be doing is helping people get through the crisis, making sure people stay in their homes, stay in and put food on their table. We've been supportive of some of the benefits that the government has announced, including the wage subsidy that will help keep people working. But we have to start thinking about how do we make sure there are jobs to go back to. There are a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that will not be able to open the doors if nothing changes. So we've called on the government to refund the GST that small and medium-sized businesses have been collecting. That will be an immediate cash infusion, allow them to pay some bills, pay the rent, hopefully be in a position where they can open their stores or restaurants again when the health pandemic is over. Then that's kind of short term. Medium term, we've got to realize that Canada is going to be fighting against every other country for investment dollars. And when the economy starts to move again, people are going to be choosing, do I invest in Canada or the US or the UK or China and Asia? So we've got to take a look at our economic model and say, are we the most attractive place in the world to invest? Because we don't want to come in fifth or sixth or seventh a year from now and wait for the leftovers after all our competitors have gobbled up the initial round of investment as the economy starts to come back online. That's not good enough for me. I don't want to see us fall to the middle of the pack. We need to be aggressively streamlining our regulations, streamlining our tax code, making sure that Canada is the best possible place in the world to put investment dollars so we can get people to work as quickly as possible. That's a little bit of a medium to long-term conversation. Right now, of course, we just need to get through the health component of that, but it's not too early to start having those conversations about how best to rebound in August, September, or October.
Well, Mr. Andrew Scheer, leader of the official opposition and leader of the Conservative Party, and a great guy. I've had the pleasure of socializing with you on a couple of occasions, and you really are a fantastic gentleman. If you ever want to have a longer chat and chat with the people in Toronto, West Toronto, Mississauga area, please give us a call, and we'd love to have you on again. Before we say goodbye, do you have a message for Canadians?
And first of all, thank you very much for that kind praise, and I've really enjoyed our time together, and hopefully, I think like all Canadians, I'm missing hockey right now, and hopefully there's some kind of return to normal for that at some point. But my message to Canadians is just follow the advice that's being given, stay healthy, take this seriously, protect our loved ones and our vulnerable ones. And to anyone who is alone or isolated, I know there are many people who need to be isolated because they've got underlying health conditions or they're in a demographic that makes them vulnerable. Just know that we're all thinking about you, and we recognize it's very difficult to stay healthy. We'll get through this together as a country.
Thank you very much, Andrew Scheer. Good night.
Thank you very much.